Hi, this is Sweet Life, and I'm Natasha, back at it with a review of Misery. Misery is a 1990 film based on Stephen King's novel of the same title. I was somewhat aware of the movie before seeing it for the first time a few years ago, but I didn't watch it until after reading the book. This was at a time when, for whatever reason, I decided to just read like a bunch of Stephen King novels. Some of them were good, but I felt like they were pretty hit or miss. But Misery was one of the books that I thought was really great from start to finish. And so with that, I got into the book and found it to be like amazing. And seeing this, there was like a movie made about it. I decided to check that out. So pretty much the premise of the story is that you have this author, Paul Sheldon, who, like, he writes novels. He's a novelist. The character in the movie is played by James Caan. He goes out to this remote area. I believe he lives in New York or LA or something like that. But he drives into this remote town, like a mountain town, in the middle of winter to stay in a cabin for a while to finish up working on his most recent novel or an upcoming novel. While out in the area, he's like, there's bad weather, snow, ice, whatnot. He ends up getting into a really bad car accident. His vehicle flips over. He sustains several injuries. He's out there. Given the snowstorm, at the time there was like a really severe snowstorm, and they expected for the storm to be really bad, which I don't understand why you'd be driving a Mustang of all things in this area. It's not the best vehicle for these conditions. But given the severity of the snowstorm, people had been warned to stay off the roads because of the very real possibility of slipping on ice, down trees, things like that. Should something happen and you get stuck out there, it's already a remote location. If something happens, it might be difficult for help to get to you. So he gets into this really bad car accident, sustains injuries, and it's looking not so good for him. But he's fortunate in a sense, at least at first glance, to be found by former nurse Annie Wilkes, played by Kathy Bates. She comes along, discovers that he's out here, he's been injured, and it turns out that she's actually Sheldon's biggest fan. He has a series of these like supermarket type novels about this female character, and turns out that Annie is a huge fan of the book. She's very excited about the upcoming installment. She's read all of the previous editions, very excited. With some creatives, when they achieve success, they appreciate it. But it's like if you think of actors or actresses who star in a TV role or a movie role that's very successful, has like a catchphrase or whatever it is. When people see you, they say the catchphrase. They want to talk to you about it. They might call you the character's name. For musicians, you might have a hit song. That's all people want to hear from you for decades to come. And it's like, past a certain point, you might get tired of that stuff. You know, you want to move on and do something else. And so that's kind of what's happened to Sheldon, in the sense that he's been writing this character for a while now, right? He's been writing this series for a while now. And while it's successful, it's now kind of like a paint by numbers kind of thing for him, where it's formulaic. He's just turning stuff out just to turn it out. And yes, it's become successful. It's, you know, given him some privileges and things like that, but it's starting to feel a bit stale. He wants to move on and work on other things, which I think is completely understandable. But here he has this problem now where he's gone off. His intention is, in the next installment of the series, is to actually kill off the main character, right? To just do away with her, take advantage of the opportunity to end the series, go off and work on something completely new and different, move on to other projects, things that might be more fulfilling, or just a new challenge. So here it is that he ends up in this accident, and by chance, he comes across this person who's like the biggest fan of his novels, which, you know, should be a blessing. It is to a degree because she basically saves his life, but it's also a curse because she's way too invested in this book and this character. So initially, she takes good care of him, right, in that she nurses him back to health. He's had some serious injuries, I believe, like he broke his leg or he got crushed or something like that. And so in addition to that, there's like problems, complications, or the potential for it, right? She actually provides him with good care, nurses him back to health. But in doing so, she realizes, or might have been aware prior, that he's working on this upcoming novel. She's very excited about it and ends up reading what he's written. And it just sends her off the deep end. Up to this point, it's one thing for people to be enthusiastic, Like, I watch movies, TV shows, but I'm not actually very into celebrities. There are a few celebrities, music I like as well, but few celebrities and musicians that I think I would go crazy over. It's like, yeah, I like your music, I like your movies, I like the character, I like the song. I wish you the best, but I don't really care about you, or I'm not very vested in you in your life. I'm not clamoring for anyone's autograph or anything like that. I'm good. I like your stuff, much respect to your talent, but I don't really follow celebrities like that. There's one or two people that I like, but I don't think I'd be overzealous to the point of making them uncomfortable. I don't need a hug. I'm good. Especially if you think of like a fan meeting someone that they really like. Maybe you might spend 5-10 minutes speaking with them, but being locked up in the house with someone like that who's really into you could be a bit uncomfortable. I imagine meeting someone for like 5 minutes who's like screaming your name and they're all over you and they want to hug and hold you. That's probably pretty jarring as well. Much less to be cooped up in the house in the middle of nowhere with this person. And so it's like, she's like socially inappropriate, just doing way too much. And it starts to make him uncomfortable. You start to get these little glimpses that she's one of these people that could be termed nice nasty, passive aggressive, where on the surface, they're very, very, very nice, very sweet. But there's like this little thing below the surface that gives you pause because they don't feel genuinely nice or sweet. It's overdone. It's overly syrupy. It doesn't feel authentic. And so with that, it might put you off a little bit. Like initially it's like, oh, hey, nice to meet you. But over time, it gives you pause. You might try to withdraw from that person, to put some distance between yourself and that person. And so it's like, as time goes on, that feeling becomes stronger, where she's nice on the surface, but the unpredictability of her character gives you pause. It keeps you on edge. You feel uncomfortable when she's on screen. One moment she's really nice, and then the next moment it's like she can flip really quickly, become angry over seemingly insignificant things. And so over time, this just intensifies, the tension ratchets up, especially after she reads this book. She starts out being nice to him, but in this kind of caretaker role where he's initially very dependent on her, things are fine. As he starts to regain his strength, the issue here is now twofold. Number one, I think she's lonely, right? She doesn't want him to leave. She becomes controlling over him. And it's like, especially when she reads this book, realizes that this character she likes is going to be killed off. Also, the book has like some bad language, which she disapproves of. She becomes especially overbearing. And as time goes on, he starts to regain his strength. She gives him a wheelchair, which gives him some degree of independence. But for the most part, she keeps him cooped up in this room. She doesn't really have much else going on in her life. She pretty much spends her time in this house and like out on the property and whatnot. Aside from that, every now and then she might go into town to get like supplies, groceries or whatever. She gets him paper, a typewriter or whatever, some other supplies, because she pretty much demands that he rewrite the book. Aside from that, she pretty much stays in the house. It's like on occasion she might leave, and over time he starts to kind of venture out of the room to get a feel for the rest of the house, an idea of what her life is like. Number one, she seems to be a very lonely person. That's the first thing you have, right? People that might live alone, but this isn't necessarily their situation. They might be well-rounded people, they're happy, things like that. They have social interactions, they get out, they have lives. This is not what she's going on with. In these like little journeys, venturing through the house, he learns a little bit about her life, which is that pretty much she watches a lot of TV. She's cooped up in this house. Most of the time, she eats like a lot of really unhealthy food. She's messy. In addition to that, there are these newspaper clippings that provide some insight into her prior life, where previously she was married, got divorced, but it's kind of telling because the husband filed for divorce. And usually it's the wife. That should give you some pause. In addition, she used to work at like some hospitals where there were questionable incidents that took place. More red flags. So throughout the film, it's like these little hints and whatnot, red flags, if you will. And that coupled with her unpredictable behavior just ratchets up the tension to the point where it's like you start to feel tense and stressed when she's on screen. She realizes that he's trying to kill off this character she likes and demands that, I think she actually destroys the manuscript that he wrote and demands that he rewrites the book to her liking. It becomes this kind of thing of him trying to escape because she seems to be dangerous and he's in a vulnerable state. He sustained these injuries from the accident, and because she's his caretaker, she's nursing him back to health. But then it's like, when convenient to her, she'll actually do things to him to kind of set back his recovery. One of which is an incredibly iconic scene. I don't even know what you would call it. She just brutalizes his legs in just an absolutely vicious attack. And it's like, as he's gaining greater independence, as he recovers from his injuries from the accident, as a means of maintaining her control over him, she attacks him viciously. And after enduring something like this, it's like if you think of like dysfunctional and abusive relationships, she fits the pattern. Because here it is, but you have like this reversal where the woman is the aggressor and the man is the victim, where you have this thing of, she does things to him. She flies off the handle. She's out of control. She becomes violent with him, otherwise does inappropriate things, but then gaslights him by turning around and kind of, oh, this thing of, look what you made me do, right? It's this classically abusive relationship. It's kind of interesting because quite often when we think about abuse, rightly or wrongly, I think many of us automatically envision a woman being the victim, right? And a man being the perpetrator. That's not really the case, right? But here it is that you have this thing being turned on its head of this overly obsessed woman physically attacking this man who's in a vulnerable state. And so with that, it's like you sympathize with him. You empathize with him because you could just imagine being in that situation and trying to endure. As the story goes on, you root for him to escape from this woman because, like, no one needs to be around this lady. She's highly problematic and very dangerous. You have, like, these multiple stories going on, right, where it's like the police are out looking for him, and you're hoping that they find him. But at the same time, you're hoping that somehow he manages to escape. And in the midst of that, you have this terrorist here that's just there's just this constant threat of violence for her, where it's like, it turns into this really tense game of hoping that he manages to escape. And it's like, even in his recovery, he comes to realize that because of her fear of him leaving, that while she's his caretaker, he has to avoid letting her know how far along he's coming in his recovery. And that kind of goes back to the thing of her previous career, where as a nurse, you had the questionable incidents. It's like her patients and like hospitals where she worked. It's something where you see, it's kind of like a God complex in a sense, where it's like she saves lives, she gives life, but also has the potential to take it away, in the sense that she saved him from this accident, but then at the same time, when things aren't going her way, or when he's doing things that she doesn't want him to, as a means of control, she'll cause him harm. She'll re-injure him. Once he picks up on that, he starts to realize that he has to escape. Not just escape, but he also has to kind of put himself through like rehab and therapy, rebuild his body, heal himself without letting her know. Because if he gets too far along, each time he gets along on his recovery journey, she does something to set him back. It's like a way of maintaining control. And so it's like you have this thing of escape taking place on multiple levels. You have him trying to physically recover from this accident, but having to do so without letting her know, without her finding out. And then you also have this thing of him trying to escape from the house because she pretty much locks him in this room. And the door of the house is locked. He's also in the middle of nowhere. And so it's just this really tense thing throughout the film that keeps you on the edge of your seat. I think thrillers are like one of my favorite genres. And I like this intense thing where you have this storm and not necessarily that it's like an escape kind of thing, or you have this degree of violence, but there's this heart-pounding tension. I'm not into horror movies because it's not really about gore, right? But I find movies like this to be scarier, right? It's stuff that, I mean, granted, what are the odds that this guy, who's this big-time author, would be out in this area where his biggest fan happens to live? He manages to get into an accident. She somehow happens to be the one that finds him. Pretty unlikely. But it could happen, I guess, right? I think that because of that, it makes it all the more terrifying. The possibility that something like this, maybe not these details, could actually happen. And that makes it even more terrifying. Like movies with monsters, zombies, things like that, not so scary. I've read a few Stephen King books. I've also seen quite a few of his movies. And I think that Misery is actually my favorite. I think I can comfortably say that Misery is my favorite. And so it's certainly at the top of my list for Stephen King novels and movies, if not my favorite. But I think it's also a really great movie overall. And I highly recommend it. It wasn't until I think James Caan actually died in 2022. And it wasn't until then that I looked at him and I realized that he looked familiar, right? That actually he was in The Godfather, right? He played Al Pacino's brother, one of Vito Corleone's sons. And, you know, they mentioned other movies he'd been in. And I was like, okay, like, yeah, I've seen this guy in other stuff, right? I think of what I've seen, his role here in Misery is probably my favorite. Kathy Bates does an incredible job. If you think about it, where this movie was really just two people in the middle of nowhere cooped up in a house. Most of the scenes take place in this one room, which kind of adds to this feeling of claustrophobia. I think that points to this being a really great story with like great acting, because it never becomes dry or boring or anything like that. It keeps your interest as these two are really the only ones interacting. And certainly there's some action, there's tension, but a lot of that comes from the dialogue, things even that aren't being said, just body language, and all of that comes together to make this a great movie. Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist. Go ahead and click that thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.